Well, good afternoon, friends, and welcome to the 2013 CTNS Research Conference. Delighted to see you all here on a warm and beautiful day. I think we're going to have a lot of fun. I'm Bob Russell, the founder and director of CTNS, and I'm the E. and G. Barber Professor of Theology and Science here in residence at the GTU. The mission of CTNS is to promote the creative mutual interaction between theology and science through three program areas: research, teaching, and public service. The events surrounding the J.K. Russell Fellowship really include all three of those program units. My family and I created the fellowship in the 80s from the Yen Center to really highlight the wonderful dialogue and interaction possible where people who want to see value added to their own research by this interdisciplinary conversation. It brings a distinguished scholar in theology and science to the GTU for research, teaching, and public service, sometimes of a few days, sometimes when scheduled to permit a few weeks or even a few months. This time, we've had a fellow here who has been part of the advanced MDiv doctoral seminar that many of you here are in. A great time talking about his work on Thursday afternoon. Yesterday evening, we had the public lecture, and today we have the research conference. So let me just say, Niels Henrik Gregersen, who is this year's J.K. Russell Fellow, is returning fellow, part of the celebration of our 30th anniversary of CTNS. Niels was here with us in the 2003-2004 term. We had a great time together, and it's wonderful to welcome you back, Niels, a decade later. Niels holds his PhD from the University of Copenhagen, having served as Aarhus University Assistant Professor of Ethics and Philosophy of Religion. He became Associate Professor of Systematic Theology and Professor of Theology and Science, and in 2004 appointed Professor of Systematics at Copenhagen. Niels is also the co-director of the Center for Naturalism and Christian Semantics. And it's been a privilege for me to visit Niels' campus and to do some research with him. Niels' primary research fields are contemporary theology and science today. His list of publications includes more than 600 entries, including 4 books, 2 co-authored books, and more than 15 edited or co-edited volumes. They include Incarnation on the Scope and Depth of Christology, Information in the Nature of Reality, From Physics to Metaphysics, one which I particularly appreciate, Naturalism and Christian Semantics, and The Gift of Grace, the future of Lutheran theology. And then finally, From Complexity to Life, on the emergence of life and meaning, and most recently, Design and Disorder, Perspective of Science and Culture. Let me just say, on a personal level, how much I appreciate Niels, both as a friend and a colleague and mentor, but primarily an occasion like this as an example, an exemplar of this interaction model of theology and science. You know, there are some of you who are working for your PhD and already incorporating science into your work at the ground level. And your entire career will be shaped by this conversation. And I'm very grateful for that. But I'm particularly appreciative and respectful of and grateful for the faculty who have done their work and proceeded through a very great career in the mid-stride across the Rubicon, have seen the importance of science and philosophy science for their ongoing theological program. I always champion Ted Peters as being one of the best examples I can think of someone who is one of the most distinguished persons in theology and science internationally, and who came to it mid-career. And it demonstrates not only the fecundity of his mind, but also his ability to sense the importance of this conversation. This is exactly the case for Niels. I'm so grateful to see someone steeped in continental metaphysics, in Scandinavian philosophy, in Pannenberg, in the whole gamut of Lutheran theology, to reach out and grasp hold of and take extremely seriously now for decades in conversations with scientists, with science, mainly natural sciences. So what I want you to be thinking of today as you listen to Niels is, first of all, what he has to teach us. I always learn immensely from Niels. He's an incredibly erudite scholar who has mastered a a profound amount of material, both in theology, but in the sciences and thought science. But also be thinking about, at a meta level, what he's doing and why is he doing it. What's driving him to do not just a kind of cocktail approach to let's share vignettes about science and theology and then go about our work sort of unchanged. But to say, no, I'm going to stop my project, I'm going to learn a tremendous amount of science and thought science, and the test will be if my theology is better from my own perspective. Right? If I couldn't have done what I've done now without that science. And if there's a spillback and a pushback of science, that you know what, we theologians and ethicists have something to say that might be of importance to you too. So be listening for that at a mental level of how he goes about almost seamlessly. It's hard to see what the seams are, they're so seamless. Right? It's how he has integrated the sciences into his theology, as Ed does, in a way which convinces you of the case he's making theologically, and yet couldn't have made without science. So as an exemplar of the J.P. Russell Fellowship, I welcome my dear friend Niels.
Thank you very much for the invitation to come here as Russell lecturer. It's a great honor for me, and it's just a joy to see you. I know so many of you, also some that I just saw yesterday and have not known earlier, and some new faces. This is a great joy for me. It's also an honor, of course, and I thought about the honor of coming back as we, for the second time. It could be because you really wanted it. It could also be since you were so gracious that you thought that I really didn't make it the first time. So let's give it a second chance, and I really think that this possibility might also be there. So, but then, as the German says, umso besser, then so much better, if that is the case. So I also want to say that what I'm saying today will be more, in a sense, on theology than on science. I think I did it the other way around 8 years ago. But this is how it's going to be and how it has developed. And I hope that you will find it interesting from whatever perspective you are coming. Because I will actually be speaking here also as a theologian rooted in a Christian tradition. And so this will also transpire, I think. The topic for my lecture yesterday was God's movement from eternity into time and into bodily space. My point was that by assuming the person Jesus, God was also assuming the biological and frail creatures that we also are. And it was also assuming the whole physical system of which we are part. So today's lecture, conversely, will be about the incorporation of time and even bodily experiences into God's own identity, or as traditionally put, into divine nature. My underlying assumption is here that a fuller understanding of God's relation to our physical and biological cosmos requires of us not just to speak about eternity in time, the topic of incarnation, but also, as suggested by the title of Russell's latest book, also about the presence of time, and I would add space in eternity, in Christian theology, the topic of resurrection. Hence, we do not only need to ask, Cur Deus caro, why did God become flesh? This was yesterday's lecture. But also, Quare caro in Deo, what has the flesh to do in God? And my question is simply to what extent and in what sense aspects of information and complexity can be useful for expressing aspects of divine life central to the Christian tradition. And here it's good to remind of this little nugget from George Box, the statistician. Essentially all models are wrong, but some are useful. So I think one has to have this sense with us. So the point is, how can we navigate between aspects of information and complexity that can be meaningfully applied to a coherent and existentially relevant concept of God, and those that can. I'm sorry this will go on. I know that there's something wrong with this system, that it just goes on, so please don't think about it. I will go back and forth sometimes. And of course, when we are venturing upon such thing, we risk the danger of having free-floating associations, just reading one picture into another, or projecting our own notions into divine reality. We know that that's a theoretical problem, so to speak. But there's also a problem that comes more from the perspective of science, which is the danger of ontologizing theories of information. So that there are many theories which are actually theories about information, and theories about information cannot be part of divine life. But actually, there are some features of information that we know from the world of creation, which may be very important. So, as a starter, I, in a sense, rule out something very important to the science of information, even basic, the mathematical conception or concept of information in Shannon, which is simply about how long the algorithmic string needs to be in order to redo an informational pattern. And I'm also ruling out computer-based complexity. If this had to be in God, then in a sense God self would have to be a great computing machine, which is succumbing to the laws of entropy and so on. And I think it would not work. But what about real-world information? What about real-world complexity? This is, in a sense, the question in front of us. Of course, there are some who would not be too happy about speaking about complexity in God. And I have to mention here Thomas Aquinas, not because I regard him as an extreme mind in the Christian tradition, from whom I have learned a lot. But on this point, he has a very strict notion of divine simplicity. It is impossible that matter should exist in God. Well, actually, I agree with him that God is not a material being, but there's also a danger of having matter too close to divine reality. It can only be something which is that God relates to externally and not internally, because God is pure activity. There's no receptivity in God. In a similar way, there can be no accident in God, he says, because there cannot be any potentiality or receptivity. And this is then summed up in Summa Theologia, first part 1, 3.7. The absolute simplicity of God may be shown in many ways from the previous articles of this question, for there is neither composition or quantitative parts in God, I agree, since he is not a body, I agree, nor composition of matter and form. Depends upon how we are thinking of it, but I do think what he means. Neither is there in him composition of genus or a difference, nor of subject and accident. In a sense, this accident is very important because this has to do with God's relationship to the external world. Is that can that be part of divine life? So I actually agree with Thomas that one cannot simply say that God is a body, since this would be to treat God as one physical object among others, or just as a metaphor for the cosmos in its entirety. I will argue, however, that there must be a place in God for the material world, hence also a divine embrace of the otherness of creation. Somehow God must be able to incorporate prematurely existence, which in itself is always bodily, always particular, and always is including an environment. Hence, God must be inhabitable in order to be able to host creaturely life. So how can we think of God as habitable. I shall not thus argue here, and this would be my basic argument, that there will be forms of real-world complexity, in particular relating to individuality and environmental dependency, that must be hosted in divine life, if God can rightly be said to host creatures, as partakers in divine life. And similarly, I shall argue that some aspect of information must, one way or another, be shared by God the Creator and the world of creation, if God is properly involved in the world of creation as a provident creator, as it's said in old-style theology, and if God is incorporating the experiences of creatures into divine life itself, as it is actually presupposed in the concept of the incarnation and of the resurrection. Because there, the whole issue is a sort of conjunction or conjoining of God with the world of the material, with the material world in Jesus. So what I want to say is that there are three forms of information that, in a sense, make sense to say, model-like, perhaps even more than model-like, that they must be in God. God must be entailing differences that make a difference. God cannot be a simple unity, but must be a community constituted by both difference and mutuality. This is part of the Trinitarian doctrine. There must be some form and structure in God. God is not a formless principle forever beyond the world as its conditioning ground, which we then subsequently can give so many names. God is Logos. And thirdly, there must also be some semantic information and communication in God. God must be knowing and remembering the world as creatures that are different from God's self, while God is also self-communicative, both internally and externally. And this is, again, I think, actually an implication of the doctrine of Trinity. So, before I then start, I should do it, as I say, the German way, with a little methodological interlude, because I feel myself that this is fairly metaphysical, and I just realize that. And I think that what I'm doing is that I want to start out in a form of descriptive metaphysics. By this I mean something that we cannot think away from a given phenomena without thinking the phenomenon away. Think of humanity. We cannot think bodiness away. We cannot think sociality, sharing, food, exchange, and living together. We still have humanity. We can actually take science away from humanity, but we can probably not take the sort of restless desire for understanding away. So we may even argue that there could be that one would take religion away from humanity. This is more uncertain. Religion is much more natural to humanity than science is, also according to cognitive science. But there are lots of these features, and this about a descriptive metaphysics of information as science. It's simply about which features are there that we cannot think away from the world and still thinking. And still think of the world. And there are some of these features of information that I just mentioned before. Then also I go into some sort of conditional metaphysics. Say, if X or Y is the case, then also P and Q must be the case. It's a little like a transcendental argument, as we know it from Kant, because it's searching for the conditional possibility for the phenomenon that is there. But it differs from Kant's approach since Kant presupposes that there are universal transcendentals for all experience. And this, I'm actually thinking about something which comes out of the descriptive analysis of metaphysics, that we then say, what are the conditions of possibility for this or that specific phenomenon, which is not part of Kant's list of Then of course we have an explorative metaphysics, which is a much more difficult thing, and it sounds so nice, but it's really a very dangerous enterprise. So I just think that we need to have it based in a descriptive metaphysics and a conditional metaphysics. The term descriptive metaphysics are taken from Peter Strawson, the Oxford philosopher, in a book long ago on individuals, on individuality which cannot be thought away and then still have humanity. He thought about basic concepts. I want to go into central concept of congenital science and also basic concepts in Christian theology, each of which, of course, can be questioned. So you can say, well, Jesus was just a nice chap, but nothing more than that. That is fully possible, and it's not anything wrong about that in a sense. It is just as you would say, well, I think I can do my biology just by biochemistry. I don't need any informational take on it. So there will be these. So I'm not starting out from safe starters, but from well-winnowed stars, so to speak. This is the way I would to pursue. So, I now begin with the first, and I'll be rather long on this one. I think that the most general feature of information is what Gregersen has expressed as that information is about differences that make a difference. It's from steps to an ecology of mind. And I think that some of the examples of this goes far back, and it's not me who's thinking about that. Seth Lloyd from MIT, one of the thinkers behind quantum computing, he even argued when he was in Copenhagen that he could have a machine where he could manage 4 qubits, but other people say that could not be true. But what he says is that quantum processes ceaselessly produce distinctive differences, which then inform the statistical probability of future events. And his point is therefore that we have to have information central into the picture of the sciences, because energy simply make physical things do things, but information tells them what to do. They are instructive. And the point is that, in a sense, that the preceding situation, even in quantum world, I'm not an expert here at all, is actually constructing the future process, not to do something very, very specific, but just, in a sense, influencing things. Maybe a stronger example could be in biology, when we have cell membranes that mark the borderlines between what is within and what is outside the cell, while also functioning as a place for transaction between inner and outer. And here we come to the point that I could have written here on the slide, Charles Sanders Peirce, because he says famously that a sign says something about something to somebody in a certain respect. And this is the new that is coming up. I don't think we have that in quantum world, unless you have a specific experiential exploitation of quantum mechanics. So again, this is of course a possibility. So in a sense, I would argue that we already have the features of semantic information when we are at the cell level. Now, what then about God? This is going to be a long story this year, and so I will not touch this one for a long time. If we now move into theologies, it is not hard to see the formal similarities with the manner in which God is described in Genesis as creating the world through distinction. God divided the light from darkness, divided the waters below from the waters above, divided the land from the waters, made distinctions between animals. Also the distinction of humanity is created in the image and likeness of God, sets into place a new distinction in the world between humans and other creatures. Then followed up by setting the distinction between the tree of life and the tree of knowledge, while giving over to human beings a space of freedom for making new distinctions. So I'm just saying that the motives of differentiation is very central to the creation stories, which is made very which especially Michael Welker of Heidelberg has pointed to very often. We are now coming to the question, what does this mean then for us today? Because this, of course, is in a sense a mythic story, that is a story about the perennial questions of humanity and of humanity having to find itself, for itself a place in the world. My point would be that the quantum events that we spoke about earlier and divine creativity must have exactly the same reference to the same processes. The ceaseless production of causally effective differences in the history of the universe. And now I want to relate to the CTNS Vatican NIODA project that many of you, I think, know, and the possibility of a non-interventionist special divine action and objective special divine action. And I have myself come very late into the CTNS Vatican dialogue, and I do not think either that I belonged to it in the beginning, because you had to be physicists really in order to be part of it. But I have been following it, and also the different schools, so to speak, within this project. Some arguing that the quantum processes actually make up a pathway for objective divine action that does not violate the laws of nature, whereas others thought it is really not very helpful theoretically. Quantum processes is a fact life. It's also a medium of divine creativity, but that's it. There's nothing more to gain from it. I have myself been convinced by the arguments for the possibility of a NIODA based on an ontological interpretation of the uncertainty principle of quantum mechanics. But what I have done myself have been more to think about what are the theoretical consequences. And what I have thought about, and I don't know whether I will be followed by so many, is that if God creates through quantum processes, then we can no longer make a distinction between special divine actions and then general divine actions, because all general activity is actually special. It is taking place event-wise. And I think that this, in a sense, puts the theoretical reception of the quantum mechanics in a new light. And it also has some consequences that I think that not all would like to see. And therefore maybe it has not been discussed very much. Because it means then that there is some sort of it means two things. First, it means that there is this coincidence or compatibilism, as it is called, between divine agency and quantum events at the bottom level. So you cannot have God, in a sense, going in and out. It is there God is there all the time. Every instance is a separate new form of creativity. It is event-like at that level. And one can never say that this is a divine action or this is something which is just a quantum event. And of course no one had wanted to say that in either of the group. But of course it means that God is at work everywhere, and also in the quantum events that we do not like, in rotations, as argued by Bob, and as Bob has pointed out, this actually gives immense problems for theology, because then God is also behind the initiation of a route to cancer, or a route to some sort of detrimental effect, or the route to a stroke, no less than with a well-functioning system. And this is, of course, why this program has been that the CTNS Vatican project on divine action has been continued as a project on natural people. And I see the reason for that. My own view is that we have to accept what I call the amoral creativity of God. That creation is a package deal, an energy package deal of physical resistance, an evolutionary package deal of joy and pain, and a finite moral package deal of doing harm or evil. In a sense, we do not live in a moral universe. And some say we live in a moral universe. I think we cannot say honestly that we live in a moral universe. That is, in a sense, not just the challenge, but it's in a sense also the way it is. And I do not say that this is something quite new, but I want to stick with this amoral actor because I think that sometimes I get understanding or reactions against it. And my own theoretical view on this is that, of course, God is omnipresent, present everywhere, but God is not manifest everywhere. And I think that we have to learn this distinction. But then comes the next part of this differentiation. And here I will come in conflict with other people, such as, for example, my good friend Ted, who is challenging me often at this point. I would say that even if I'm a rock bottom compatibilist at bottom level, I can still be what is sometimes called a libertarian on higher levels, because I think that quantum mechanics does not explain, in a sense, the differences that come up in biological life. It could be, but this is at least not the quantum mechanics that we have in front of us. And my point is that as soon as we have these sheltered conditions of cell systems, and we have also come on, and we also go on and have autopoietic systems like an immune system. It does not think, but it just responds. And it responds according to its own immune system to how it is taking things up or letting things out. An immune system itself is on the evolutionary development, but always on its own basis. This is what is meant by autopoiesis. Just as we can say, I can talk now to Dan Peterson about some theoretical matters, and then while we're doing that, I think that the quantum mechanical explanation of the two of us doesn't matter. I do not even think that a neural one matters unless it is so that our histories are encoded, which they probably are, because I think that it is the histories of our prior use of the brains that may be behind this, and this can only be explained from the different books we have read and other things. So I think that actually that God creates for cosmological freedom, and that it is this emerging freedom through boundaries, and this means that there are two positions that I don't take, which are strong also in my own tradition. I am a Lutheran, and there will be some here who are Calvinists, and there are also within the Roman Catholic tradition there are also different views here. But Luther, in his on the freedom of on the bondage of the will, this was a Freudian slip. He is what could be called an incompatibilist determinist. That is, God does it, nature does not do it, because it is really God who does it. This is also sometimes called heart determinism, this view. And in a sense, I'm, as I said, a compatibilist, which is much closer to a later figure, Friedrich Schleiermacher, who in his systematic theology on Christian faith, I think it's in paragraph 44 or 46, writes that the reign of God coincides fully with the system of nature. So this is what I call an in and out compatibilism, which I'm not subscribing to, because this would actually mean that there would be no freedom emerging. So I argue that God creates by facilitating distinctions to make further distinctions, like the German social philosopher Niklas Luhmann. God said to Adam and Eve, make distinctions. This was not what he said, actually. But this is his interpretation, because having the choice between the tree of life and the tree of knowledge actually, in a sense, gave the pressure on them to do the cutting, to do the decision. And then there's Hans L. Martensen of Copenhagen, and a professor of systematic theology. And I think he was first, as far as I know, but there can always be somebody earlier. But in 1849, he wrote this wonderful sentence saying, "Divine omnipotence is the omnipotence of love, and is therefore the self-limiting power of love." So this was 1849. I'm actually his successor. There have been some in between.
Yeah.
And there's not always progress in theology, but this is how it is. I think this is the way it is. So it's not about saying that God does not have omnipotence or anything, but it's about the use of it, what it's used for. So I would argue that the view of quantum determination and the kenotic view of creation are not two conflicting views, but operate at two different levels. I'm sure that not all will agree with me, but this is what in a sense, what I am going for. Let's see what is next. Yes. Then we come to the question whether there are differences in God, eternal differences in the eternal God. And I think that there is at least one candidate which is very central to a tradition, which is the divine self-decision, the decision to create and also redeem the world of creation. God chose us in Christ before the foundation of the world, destined us for adoption as his children through Jesus Christ, according to the good pleasure of his will, to the praise of his glorious grace that he freely bestowed on us in the beloved, that is, in Christ. Of course, what does it mean, chose us? Who are the us? I will not discuss this question here, because I don't think that you can find any, you cannot extract a sociological universalism on such a passage, but you have to see it in a wider context. But it does mean that the cutting information of difference has a place in God. It also is said here, I think, since it is a decision made before the foundation of the world, that it is independent of the temporal ups and downs, the vicissitudes of history, and even maybe independent on human freedom, but that again can be discussed. I'm just saying that this understanding of this about there being a lover and a beloved in this here is actually what is the ground of the Trinitarian theology that was later developed. The Father as a lover, the Son as a beloved, and the Holy Spirit as the mutual love. And I want to then just to point to Wolfgang Pannenberg, who is well known here in Berkeley, in one of the central passages that he has in his Systematic Theology, Volume 2, where he speaks about the Son as the generative principle of otherness. So the otherness of creation is already represented in God, in the Son, who is then both the creative origin of the particularity of each creature. Everything came into being through him, and is at the same time the concrete epitome of its various manifestations. So there, in a sense, two things are said. One is it is that the Logos is created, the source of what is happening, but also the epitome of it all. And this means then, of course, that distinctions and otherness are not seen as deficiencies foreign to divine simplicity, as an Aquinas, but as perfections of the love that God is. And I'm just saying that I do not really not like to be debunking Aquinas, because there's so much to learn about it. And one will have to see the paragraph 3 of the first part in relation to how he develops his Trinitarian theology and again his eschatology. But I do think actually that there is not really any place for an incorporation into God's own divine nature. So it is the creatures that are relating to God, but not God relating to the creatures. This was the longest one. The next one is on information. Information as form and structure by God and in God. I think we are here going from cutting information to historically evolved channeling information. As soon as we have something which is formed, then it is channeling processes. Think of a riverbed. Once it is there and it's raining, then the water will go down this way due to gravity, of course, but it will be channeled in this direction due to the specific form of the riverbed. So now we have semi-stable structures of information that begin to take over, morphological structures and so on. And we find in contemporary biology in particular ways of thinking this through. Even a person like John Maynard Smith has presented an information theoretical interpretation of DNA functioning as stored forms of instructional codes. So it's the DNA that instructs for the production of the protein. So there's a difference of levels here between the DNA level and the protein level. And I think that he's basically right about this, but some again would argue that this informational interpretation is not necessary as long as the individual DNAs do what they do. Why then do we need to say that they do it? Because they are information. So this is again the discussion in the philosophy of biology. Another approach which is more aggressive in a sense is the biosemiotic approach. I'm now mentioning my own co-dame, Jesper Hofmeier, who wrote a very important book, I think, which is called Biosemiotics, which is scanned on the University Press in Chicago, where he is pointing to this importance of the cell membrane also for semantic information, as we will see later. I'm just reminding that to say that there is form in God is something that, in a sense, must be said by standard Christian theology, so far as Logos in the beginning, in archaic, was Logos, the word. And Logos was with God, paratonto, and was God, not the God. Logos is not the God. Logos is not the Father. Logos is not Hotelos, but is Theos, just in the predicative sense, belongs to God, is part of God's nature, and this is in a sense part of God's nature. So if Logos is in nature, differentiation in form must be there too. And in the early patristic period, we find this expressed in many ways. A distinction between the Logos in the Artetos, the Logos in God, and the outgoing divine Logos, the Logos prophorikos. So there is always an inner, which is a precondition for the outer. So this is sort of a conditional metaphysics already at that time. And in the Franciscan tradition, Christ is also called the forma formarum, the creative form of all forms. So then the question is, what then does it mean with the material body of Jesus? Now we've been talking about the divine Logos. What if we go the other way around and in a sense now take in also the perspective of the incarnation that I spoke about yesterday? Then there is this idea, which is very strong in tradition, about Christ as microcosm. And it is here and there, it's in Gregory of Nyssa, it is in Maximus Confessor, it's also in Gregory the Great from the Latin tradition, and also here in Bonaventura. Christ as a human being shares with all creatures. Indeed, he possesses being with rocks, lives amongst plants, senses with animals, and understands with angels. Since Christ, as a human being, note, since Christ as a human being has something from all creation and was transfigured, all is said to be transfigured in him. Very beautiful. The question is, of course, is more than beautiful. Is microcosm a verbal way of thinking today? It features actually a central point in Ted Peters' systematic theology, and I have also taken the whole from you there. It's also featured centrally in Connor Cunningham's new book, Darwin's Pious Idea. But does it work? Well, I think it does. But we need to also to see the criticism against this notion. One of the things that could speak for it is emergent theory, in which we have to do with nested hierarchies, so that we have, the stardust in us, and we have the animal nature, and so on. So emergent theory can be seen as a contemporary version of the microcosm notion. But is it so? There are objections made by Richard Borkham, the New Testament scholar from St. Andrews in Scotland, who's also a Mormon specialist, is a very good systematic theologian, although he's a New Testament scholar. He says, well, incorporation is too much. And his argument for that is that we have to see that evolution is not just about, having common origins, but it's also about branching. So in a sense, we as humans, we have branched off from other life forms. We are now bipedal, so we don't walk down there like dogs. We are moving around, unlike trees. We are preferring to be on firm ground, unlike the dolphins or the eagle. So in what sense can we talk about Christ or human beings as a microcosm, asks Richard Borkham. And he says, well, actually we should not do that. We should rather talk about an ecological relatedness. But this, again, is a way of thinking which, in a sense, betrays, he would admit it, I think, betrays the Christological doctrine of concretism. That is, that the one who Jesus Christ was the one who lived about 2,000 years ago for 30 years in a specific body. He was 5 feet and 4 inches long, or something, maybe a little bigger. Okay, 6. Okay, he was 6 feet and 2 inches tall, and he had this. His weight was so, his color was so. He has a beard which was this way. And of course, this is correct if we are talking about Jesus. But do we, by Jesus Christ, mean that historical entity alone? What Richard Borkham is afraid of is that we are making the incarnation as a template for understanding divine omnipresence. Because he would say, well, it is very separate what God did in Jesus. And then God is present in things, but he is not present as Christ. And I think it's a theological challenge which one has to take up. But I think that it's overly concrete. And I think that he and many others commits the fallacy of misplaced concreteness. Because you could also say, well, that there's also a difference between men and women. So how can, is it only, did God only become man and not human and not woman? Did he not just become a Jew and not a Chinese or Dane? There is a problem here of thinking that we are not sharing the characteristics of lived life. And from the perspective of deep incarnation, it is this sharing of the self-same conditions. Even if we are not flying like the eagle, even if we are not swimming like the dolphin, I think Ted and I will be swimming with the dolphins.
That's right.
Yeah, actually. So I think that it is a misplaced concreteness to say that that we, and we cannot be what I call in and out concretists, saying it was Jesus of Nazareth who walked around in the sand in sandals, who was the Son of God, and that's it. I think that we are making a joke out of Christianity by saying that. I'm a little shocked. I'm not saying that he was not the Son of God, but he was the Son of God because the Son of God already was there. So it was not a new invention in the first 30 years. If we have to think that way, if we say to ourselves as Christians, this is the way we as Christians have to think about that, I think that we are making a joke out of Christianity, and I think that this is not in line with a bigger tradition which always said that God actually became human and not just a homo. So, I would say that there's an essential importance of divine sharing as a precondition for the intrinsic relatedness to this world. God must share these conditions in order to be intrinsically related to them and not just externally related to the world. Now we come to the semantic and communicative information. The general definition of information is as follows, that information is semantic if and only if the information consists of a number of data which are well formed and are meaningful. So, Luciana Florido. What I find interesting with this concept of semantic information is that natural selection may explain the evolutionarily developed selective nature of the retrieval of information that we are doing, but cannot explain what could be called the overwhelming bandwidth of potential information out there. Think about how much is going on out there, and we only perceive very, 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 very little. Charles Sanders Peirce again said that the whole world is perfused with signs, because there are differences that can become a difference for us, for someone. And so, and I think this is actually a way of thinking. It's not a metaphysics a la modo Hegel or a la modo Whitehead, but it's just to say distinctions are there, out there to be used, and there are much more than we actually use. But think about if you're sitting and having a coffee on the cafe down here, then suddenly you're turning your head around. Why are you doing that? It could be because of something. It could be an attractive woman, if you are a man. The whole world is confused with science. There's another important thing here is that, as I write there, that faith and the sense of promise is as old as unicellular life. By living, we have to go out of ourselves. And we don't know what is out there. We have instead to test the field. We have to be courageous there. And Peirce again has this wonderful sentence that I was just struck by, perhaps because I'm a Lutheran again. He says that the truth of any proposition lies in the future. That's a good thing. That means you're not just stating facts, but you are stating something that are interesting facts. You're stating a pathway, a way to walk, an orientational opening, rather than just saying, this is how it is. So a proposition is more than just a statement of facts. It's an invitation to walk, like in the Chinese thinking of a Tao. And by the way, the Chinese translation of the Gospel of John is, in the beginning was Tao, and Tao was with God, and Tao was God. It is much better translation than by word. Much better, I think. Okay. Here we also have the informational importance of missing information, what Terence Deacon calls, that is, we want to know what is out there. We can also be missing signals. So if you're hungry, you're missing some food, you're missing some sugar or coffee, or what it might be. This is also important for information at this level. And this information is always defined by the organism itself. As Mark Graves writes, Information depends upon the interpretative processes to identify significance among the order of flux with this big whole bandwidth of information. A molecule in the air may identify a possible mate or predator to a rabbit that a human olfactory system cannot register. We are registering so little. But for the rabbit, in a sense, the scent precedes the descent. Without scenting it, you will not survive. So this is also in God. I will go quick. You know this already. Of course, that we speak about logos, we speak about word and wisdom as internal to the divine nature. And I would argue that if God is having this semantic information, what is going on in the world, God must share the insight and perspective of temporal and spatial creatures. One who has seen that is Charles Hartshorne, the process philosopher, who in the book on divine perfection said that God needs to include an endless capacity for self-relativization without losing divine identity. He also saw it was a problem how to think this. And I think that Bob Russell has put the same on the agenda of his book on time in eternity, in a very provocative idea, a very thoughtful idea, which is not developed here. Bob is developing other ideas, but it is to say that each moment of time has a fractal-like structure in which each past and present, I would say, moment has its own future and past, as does each future moment, and this extends endlessly into the infinite. So, it is not only the information width out there, it's in a sense also one's own sort of inner depth of fractal understanding that we never are able to go into. So, my point would be here that a true divine self-communication requires a divine communing with the world of creation. Then we're coming to the end, which is actually the eschatology, which is wrongly spelled, towards an embodied eschatology. And the point is, how can we rescue, in a sense, the damned world? Not just my better self, but my real self in my interdependencies with other people. I think we can talk about natural complexity, as Rescher does. The work of individuals and communities are fussy and affords endlessly many perspectives, each with a truth relation to RBC. May I just ask, you said 10 minutes, but I was supposed to speak to half past. Okay, so I can, okay, thank you. So the natural complexity is the fact that you cannot, for me it's not important with, I would say, with a logical description of me, or with the essential Niels, or the soul of Niels. Because if I had to talk about my soul, I would have to include you, inter alia, and many, and the sunbeam, which is also influencing the way I feel right now. But all of us then also have a history behind us. There is a causal, or what I call a pathway complexity. There are causal influences of different types. Say, sunbeams, teachers, and lovers, which cannot be put into one category. So I think there is no monocausal explanation for me being me, because I'm the result of so many, not just endlessly many that are difficult to enumerate, but I'm actually influenced by different types of causal influences. So you looking at me now means something else than the sun shining on me. So it is. So this is, I think, belongs to our complexity. That it's just not that we are very, very complicated, and there are so many things that we should take into account. But it's different types of influences that cannot be put into one causal scheme. So we have to be explanatory pluralists in a way. We have to try to understand things from different perspectives, knowing that we cannot take everything in account. But then for me, it is very important, the next point, which I just made up for this lecture, is what I call developmental complexity. the point is, in a sense, that it's not only important for me to understand myself in my past or my present. There will also be the future. But here is the danger there. Because if we then understand the eschatological future as a time in which we have no new futures apart from the future that we once had, then I think that we are not thinking the symbol of eternal life. Then it's like an eternal knowledge or eternal understanding. It's like a visio beatifica or aspects of that. So this is what I want to rescue into the repertoire of an eschatology. In a sense, we are not just seen by our past and present, by God, but also in our potential futures, also, I would say, beyond our death. So I think that these three aspects of complexity, natural complexity, causal or pathway complexity, and developmental complexity need to be implied in the embodied complexity that is the candidate for being incorporated into God. I can of course not promise you an eternal life, but I'm trying to think, if we want to think about eternal life, these things must be part of divine life. So again, this is sort of conditional with physics. If you believe in resurrection, and if you believe in eternal life, then this or that will have to be part of it. So I know that you can always drop off and say, no, I don't. But I'm now, in a sense, trying to think along in this conditional way. So I will now, in the end, come back to Bob Russell's book, Time and Eternity, that I have read here over the last time, and it has a lot of insights that I will not go into. Bob Russell is situating Pannenberg's view of time in the context of Anglo-Saxon and Lutheran philosophy, I should say, A and B time, and he's rethinking Pannenberg's eschatology in light of contemporary science. And the central point for both Pannenberg and for Bob, and also for me, is in a sense to rescue distinctiveness and overcoming separation. And what Russell then has done is to try to think some aspects of contemporary science that could be open to this possibility. The first of them is quantum entanglement and the idea of non-Hausdorff space, which means a space in which there is a constant branching, which does not, so that there's not really a separation between entities there. He's also trying to think of the infinity of God via Cantor's theory of the transfinite and different forms of infinity there, rather than staying with Hegel. He's also trying to rethink the divine omnipresence in light of special relativity, leading to a multidimensional divine presence, which in a sense absorbs some of the problems that were seen by Charles Hartshorne, but were not solved by him. So here are some quotations, and I will finish in 5 minutes. First of all, that I think is what is important is that Bob underlines the multi-perspectival nature of complexity. He asks, how do we incorporate the insight that each moment of the past and future has its own past and future moments, and that this reiterates endlessly? So the point is that time is not about rescuing what was there in a bygone present. We have to understand that this bygone present, which is a past, also had a past and also had a future. So in a sense, the fractal nature, so I would translate it, is that there's been some sort of future. When I was a young teenager, there was a sort of a future hope that must be rescued as well, which is also part of me. It also has to be transformed, probably. The modify it, and maybe also make more modest, I don't know. But it is, I think that this is very important, that we do not just have a time sequence A, B, C, D, E, but each moment has this kind of internal temporal structure. And then we have again this notion of fractal depth that I just quote again. This is not developed by Bob in his book, if I'm not, but I think it's really very interesting to think along. And the last thing is then regarding the co-presence of the temporal tenses, past, present, and future in eternity. This is, in a sense, not a new idea. This is an idea that goes back at least to Plotinus and also to Gregersen, who spoke about the simultaneous presence of past, present, and future in one moment. And Bob puts it as follows: thus, in eternity, all present events together with their respective pasts and futures are non-separable. All present events are, as present events, will be co-present to each other, held together in an extended simultaneous whole that nevertheless retains their unique determinate pasts and unique indeterminate futures, parentheses, co-presence. I think that this is a very good description, but not of human eternal love, but of divine. And here then comes my questions. And the first is whether we can think time without space. And the whole thing about deep incarnation has all to do with regaining the spatial dimensions of incarnation, not just the time ones. And in the flow of his argument, also Bob sees that, of course. He's focusing on time, but he says, of course, quantum non-separability is a spatial phenomenon, spatial phenomenon. It is not about the non-separability of temporal events per se. I think that is the point that so it's actually non-separability is already, and co-presence are already spatial metaphors, and maybe more than metaphors. So can you come from time in God to space in God? And can you also say something about what I would call the uneliminable limitations of complex life? I would then ask in with these questions. I just read them. In what sense is eschatology something we have to wait for? In what sense is the new creation already at work in the divine incorporating of creaturely experiences, even though we ourselves in our own awareness are not yet there? Yet, as Bernard Wieland says at a place, we live deeper than we think. We live in a deep horizon, fractal awareness than we are able to conceptualize. So the future of the new creation has also to do with our own awareness. I'm not saying that there will be no future. I'm just saying that the future is already here. Could it be that we indeed, for thinking time and space together in Christian eschatology, also should that we should think time and space together in Christian eschatology? And also, my second point then is that I would argue that a participation in divine life does not mean that we will ever share the simultaneous co-presence of the temporal tenses, which is a distinguishing mark of God's eternity, nor that we will ever be co-extensive with God, yet we will take bits and shares in it. Creatures are limited. Unlimited complexity is not a creaturely prerogative. And I think that this could be developed by discussing Bob's analogy with the OpenStack library, if you know that. We don't have time for that here, but I think it's a very appealing argument. But the third point then is complex systems are developmental systems. There must therefore be a successive time also in eternal life. There will also be faith and hope in eternal life. The three abide, faith, hope, and love. Faith is stretching forward. Hope is looking forward. There will be stretching also in divine life because we are limited. And I think this is very well put by Gregory of Nyssa in his eschatology, the life of Moses and elsewhere, rather than in the Augustinian tradition, I think we should think along this time, rescuing not only natural and causal pathway complexity, but also developmental complexity. And here you see a standstill photo of my own complex world, the main building of Copenhagen University. And if you look there, I just tell it to you that here is a bust of Hans L. Martensen. Thank you.